snow drifted softly over Manhattan that morning, melting into the city's gray pulse. It was the kind of day that made even the bravest hurry, shoulders hunched, faces buried in scarves, all moving with the same silent urgency that New York demanded. But in the middle of that rushing tide, one person moved differently. Her name was Hannah Lewis, a 26-year-old nurse just off a 12-hour night shift at St. Luke's Hospital. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as though the city's noise couldn't touch her. She was tired of bone, tired of the kind of exhaustion that didn't just live in muscles but settled quietly in the mind. Yet there was a certain calm to her, the quiet discipline of someone who had spent years tending to pain that wasn't her own. Her cream coat was frayed at the sleeves, her navy scrubs visible underneath, and her blonde hair was pulled into a neat ponytail tied with a white ribbon. The ribbon had started to wear thin at the edges, but she kept it anyway. It reminded her that care didn't have to be perfect to be real. Outside a small bakery on 86th and Columbus, Hannah stopped. The window glowed with a warm yellow light, fogged from the heat inside. A handwritten sign advertised day-old croissants at half price. She smiled faintly. It was a small thing, but in her world of long nights and quiet sacrifices, small joys mattered. She reached for the door handily, and that was when she heard it. A soft cry, a sharp intake of breath, and then the unmistakable sound of a body hitting pavement. A woman had collapsed just a few steps ahead. People reacted the way they usually did in cities, with hesitation. Some gasped, some reached for their phones, others simply stood there, frozen in uncertainty. Hannah didn't. Her coffee cup hit the ground, spilling across the sidewalk in a brown puddle, but she didn't notice. By the time the others stepped back, she was already kneeling beside the woman, her movements brisk, efficient, and impossibly calm. The woman was in her 60s, maybe older. Elegant coat, polished shoes, silk scarf. Her hair a silver gray and carefully pinned was coming loose. Her skin had lost all color, lips slightly blue. Shallow breaths, fading fast. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Hannah's voice was low but steady. There was no answer. She felt for a pulse at the neck, a faint, slow, but there. She looked around once, taking in the scene, people watching but not helping, cars passing indifferently. Her focus never wavered. She loosened the woman's scarf, slipped her own coat off, and folded it beneath the woman's head. Her fingers were firm and practiced as she tilted the chin, checking for obstruction, assessing airway and breathing. She didn't panic. Years of late nights and emergencies had stripped her of that luxury. Someone murmured, "Should we call someone?" Hannah didn't even look up. "Already on it," she said, pulling her phone from her pocket. She rattled off the address, symptoms, and details to the 911 dispatcher, her tone clipped and professional. Female, mid-60s, unconscious, pale, shallow breathing, possible cardiac event. The calm precision in her voice steadied the small crowd around her. A few people stepped closer, offering help, but Hannah only said, "Stay clear, give her air." Moments later, she searched the woman's purse for identification, an act of both protocol and compassion. Inside was a neat wallet, leather and obviously expensive. She found a name, Sir Carrington. There was also a folded card with an emergency contact. It said simply, "Athana-san." She dialed the number without hesitation. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was sharp, controlled, the kind that didn't expect emergencies but handled them when they came. "Hi, my name is Hannah," she said. "I'm a nurse. Your mother, Sarah Carrington, collapsed outside the bakery on 86th and Columbus. I've performed first aid, and an ambulance is on the way. She's stable for now, but weak. You may want to come quickly." There was a brief silence, then a single, steady reply, "I'm on my way." Less than 10 minutes later, a black car pulled to the curb. A tall man stepped out, moving with urgency but not chaos. His dark coat brushed against the falling snow as he cut through the crowd. His expression focused, composed shifted when he saw the figure on the ground. "Mom," he breathed. The word broke from him, stripped of formality. He knelt beside her, taking her hand with the kind of care that came from both love and fear. "Ethan," the woman whispered weakly, eyes fluttering open. Relief washed across his face. "I'm here," he said. "You're going to be okay." Hannah stepped back, letting them have their moment. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her breath still visible in the air. She didn't look for thanks, she just watched the woman's color slowly return, the faint strength coming back to her pulse. The sirens echoed down the street, growing louder until red lights splashed across the bakery windows. Paramedics rushed in, and Hannah immediately briefed them, rattling off vital signs and the actions she had taken. Pulse was weak but consistent, airway clear, possible hypoglycemia or arrhythmia. She regained consciousness 2 minutes ago. The paramedic nodded, impressed. "You're a nurse?" "Yes," Hannah said simply, as they lifted Sarah onto the stretcher. The older woman's hand reached out weakly, fingers brushing Hannah's wrist. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you for not walking away." Hannah gave a small, tired smile. Anyone would have done the same, but Sarah's gaze lingered, clear despite her exhaustion. "No," she said faintly, "not anyone." Then she was carried into the ambulance. The doors closed, and the street noise returned. Footsteps, car horns, life continuing as if nothing remarkable had happened. Ethan turned to the young woman standing there. For the first time, he saw her not as a figure in scrubs, but as someone extraordinary. There was something grounding about her presence, something unpretentious. "Wait," he said quickly. "What's your name?" Hannah hesitated, then offered a faint smile. "Hannah Lewis," she said, "from Street Luke's." And before he could say anything else, she turned and walked away, her ribbon swaying gently with each step until the crowd swallowed her up. Later that day, news began to ripple quietly through the hospital halls. Staff whispered about the woman who had been brought in, the mother of one of New York's wealthiest CEOs, and the nurse who had found her. Some said the son had been furious when he first heard. Others said he hadn't left his mother's side since she arrived. What everyone agreed on, though, was that without Hannah, the story could have ended very differently. Outside, the snow melted into slush, the bakery reopened, and the world moved on. But for Ethan Carrington, the image of that nurse kneeling in the cold coat under his mother's head stayed with him. The city that had always felt mechanical and transactional suddenly seemed, for the first time in years, deeply human. And for Hannah, the day ended the same way it had begun, quietly, without applause. She walked home with no idea that the life she'd just saved would soon find its way back to hers, carrying gratitude, change, and something she didn't yet have a name for. The next morning, the hospital corridors hummed with their usual rhythm, monitors beeping, footsteps echoing on polished floors, the quiet urgency of people carrying invisible weight. Hannah moved through it like a shadow, steady and unnoticed, as she always did. She wasn't one for attention. Her satisfaction came from the small victories: the patient who smiled again after surgery, the family who whispered thank you with teary eyes. She didn't seek praise. But that morning, something was different. When she entered the break room, the chatter stopped. A few nurses exchanged knowing glances, and one of them, Maria, her friend since training, looked up with a grin. "So, hero nurse, when were you planning to tell us?" Hannah frowned. "Tell you what?" Maria slid her phone across the table. On the screen was an article from a local news outlet. "CEO's mother collapses on street, saved by quick-thinking nurse." Below it was a blurry photo of Hannah kneeling beside the older woman, her expression calm and focused, snow clinging to her hair. The headline was dramatic, but the story was accurate enough. Hannah sighed softly, half embarrassed, half amused. "Oh, number, not this." Maria laughed. "Oh, yes, it's all over. They called you an angel in scrubs. The comments are wild, people saying you're proof good humans still exist." "I was just doing my job," Hannah said quietly, reaching for her coffee. "That's all." But somewhere across the city, the man who had watched his mother almost die wasn't letting the day pass so quietly. Ethan Carrington sat in his glass-walled office on the 54th floor of Carrington Enterprises, a company whose name was as old as his family's reputation. He had built his career on precision, numbers, deals, logic. Yet none of those things explained why he couldn't stop replaying the image of that nurse in his head. Her name was Hannah Lewis. The hospital had told him that much when he called to check on his mother's care. But beyond that, there was little to know. She wasn't someone easily searchable, not someone with a glittering social profile or a trail of curated photos. She lived simply, worked hard, and left no noise behind her. For a man used to controlling every variable, her quiet anonymity fascinated him. By the afternoon, Sarah Carrington was recovering well. She was propped up in her hospital bed, sipping warm tea. Her color returned. Ethan sat beside her, still shaken by the thought of what could have been. When he thanked her nurse for the care, the woman smiled and said, "It was Hannah who brought her in. She stayed until we took over." That name again. His mother's voice was soft but firm when she spoke. "Ethan, I want to see her, the young woman who helped me. She probably doesn't expect visitors," he said. "Then she'll be surprised," Sarah replied, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. "And so will you, perhaps." That evening, Hannah finished her shift and stepped into the cold night air, her breath forming little clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The day had been long, but she felt lighter somehow. She crossed the street toward the small diner she often stopped at, the kind of place with flickering neon lights and the smell of old coffee in the air. She ordered soup and sat alone by the window, letting the warmth thaw the fatigue in her bones. When the door opened, she didn't look up immediately, not until the shadow fell across her table. "Miss Lewis," the voice was deep, smooth, with a calm authority that made her blink up in surprise. Standing there was the same man she'd seen kneeling by his mother's side, a day taller than she remembered, wrapped in a dark coat, his expression composed but sincere. He looked out of place in the tiny diner, like a photograph slipped into the wrong album. "Mr. Carrington," she said, straightening slightly. "How's your mother?" "She's recovering," he said, sitting down when she gestured toward the seat opposite her. "You saved her life." "I did what anyone trained would have done," she said gently. He studied her for a moment. There was something disarming about how calm she was. No fluster, no nervousness in the presence of someone with wealth and status, just quiet dignity. "You say that," he said, "but most people didn't even move." She shrugged. "People freeze. It's not that they don't care, they just don't know what to do." The conversation flowed easily, but under it was an unspoken tension, not romantic yet, not quite, but charged with something unexplainable. He asked about her work, her hours, how long she'd been at St. Luke's. She answered politely but without embellishment. She wasn't trying to impress him, and that, perhaps, impressed him most. When the bill came, he insisted on paying. She resisted at first, then gave in with the half-smile that softened her tired features. As they stepped out into the cold, he said quietly, "There's a dinner tomorrow night, a small charity event my mother was hosting before we broken bar everything. She insists you come." "And so do I." Hannah's instinct was to refuse. She didn't belong in glittering rooms filled with people who measured worth in brands and power. But there was something in his tone, not demand, not pity, but genuine gratitude. "I'll think about it," she said finally, and she did. All night, in fact, she lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, turning the thought over and over. It wasn't about the event, it was about him, the way he looked at her like she was something rare, not someone invisible. That look made her uneasy, because she wasn't used to it. The next evening, she stood outside the Grand Hotel where the dinner was held, feeling entirely out of place. The dress she wore was simple, borrowed from a friend, the color a soft blue that matched her eyes. Her hair was pinned neatly, the white ribbon still there, a quiet mark of herself she refused to hide. When she walked in, heads turned, not because she was glamorous, but because she looked so broken bar real. Amidst sequins and designer gowns, she was graced without effort. Sarah saw her first and lit up instantly, waving her over with surprising strength. "Hannah, dear," she said warmly, taking her hand. "You look lovely. I told my son you'd come." He didn't believe me. Ethan, standing beside his mother, gave a small, amused smile. "You underestimate my mother's persistence." The evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and curious glances. People whispered about who she was, the nurse who saved Mrs. Carrington. Some smiled kindly, others, with subtle condescension, but Hannah held herself steady, never shrinking, never boasting. Ethan watched her navigate that room with quiet grace and realized how rare that composure was. At one point, as the crowd thinned, she stood near the balcony, looking out at the city lights below. He joined her, and for a moment, neither spoke. The hum of laughter and glasses faded behind them. "Do you ever get used to it?" she asked softly. "To what?" "Being looked at like you're more than you are just because of a name." He hesitated, then said, "Maybe I'd trade it for being looked at like you were today, for something you actually did." She turned to him, meeting his eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, something neither of them was ready to name yet. When she finally left that night, the city felt different again. She'd walked in thinking she didn't belong, but somehow, in that world of glass and gold, she had left an impression that money couldn't buy. And Ethan Carrington, the man who never mixed emotion with reason, found himself thinking of her long after she was gone, not because she'd saved his mother's life, but because, without meaning to, she'd reminded him what life actually felt like. The following weeks blurred into a quiet rhythm of work, exhaustion, and fleeting thoughts Hannah couldn't quite name. The hospital never stopped, and neither did she. Patients came and went, names faded into charts, and her hands remained steady even when her heart wasn't. She told herself that night that dinner had been a one-time thing, a moment out of place, a world she didn't belong to. Yet every so often, she would catch herself replaying the memory of Ethan's gaze, not because it flattered her, but because it had seen her, truly seen her, and that kind of recognition lingered long after logic said it shouldn't. On the other side of the city, Ethan Carrington was learning something unfamiliar: distraction. He was a man who built empires out of spreadsheets and deadlines, someone who believed feelings were simply inefficient data. But now, even in meetings, his mind drifted to the woman who spoke softly but carried a steadiness he couldn't shake. His mother noticed before he admitted it. "You're thinking about her," Sarah said one afternoon, her voice laced with amusement. The nurse. He didn't deny it. "She has a broken bar." "Different." Sarah smiled knowingly. "Different can be the beginning of everything. Don't let pride make you slow." It wasn't pride that stopped him, though. It was respect, and something like fear. Hannah didn't need him. She didn't orbit around wealth or status. She had her own gravity, and he wasn't used to people who didn't bend toward his. 2 weeks later, he found a reason to visit the hospital again. Officially, it was to thank the staff for their care and make a donation to the cardiac unit. Unofficially, it was to see if she was there. He stood at the nurse's station, polished and composed in his tailored coat, while the staff whispered behind clipboards. When Hannah appeared, he felt something quiet shift inside him. She was exactly as he remembered, hair neatly tied, tired eyes brightened by purpose, that same soft blue ribbon holding her ponytail. "Mr. Carrington," she greeted, surprised but polite. "Your mother's doing well, I hope?" "She's back to scolding me for working too much, so I'd say she's fully recovered," he said with a half-smile. "I came to deliver a check to the department and to say thank you, again, properly this time." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "You've already thanked me." "Then consider this my persistence," he said lightly. "Would you let me buy you dinner tonight?" She hesitated, caught between instinct and curiosity. She wasn't naive. She'd seen men like him before, men who wore confidence like armor. But there was no arrogance in his eyes, only sincerity. Maybe, she thought, it wouldn't hurt to step outside her small circle of exhaustion for one evening. "All right," she said quietly. Dinner. That evening, she met him at a small restaurant tucked away from the city's noise, not the kind of place he usually went, but one he had chosen deliberately. It was warm, intimate, the light soft enough to make everything feel personal. For once, he didn't talk about business. He asked about her, where she grew up, why she became a nurse, what she loved most about her work. She answered carefully at first, but the walls began to lower when she saw he was listening, really listening. "I like helping people when it actually matters," she said, not in a headline kind of way, in the quiet ways no one sees. He leaned forward slightly. "That's rare. Most people want to be seen." She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't strike me as someone invisible." He smiled faintly. Being seen isn't the same as being understood. Something about that stayed with her long after the meal ended. As they walked out into the night, he opened his umbrella over her, and she noticed the simplicity in the gesture and no performance. No expectation, just kindness. Days became weeks, and the unlikely connection between them grew quietly, like something fragile but steady. He would stop by the hospital sometimes under the guise of donation meetings, bringing coffee for the staff and conversation for her. They would talk about everything from art to childhood dreams. Slowly, she began to see the man behind the name as the one who had spent his life building walls of control to protect something much softer underneath. But not everyone saw it that way. Gossip had a way of spreading quickly, even in a place dedicated to saving lives. Nurses whispered when he appeared. Some smirked, others judged. The nurse and the CEO, one of them said with a knowing laugh, "She must have something he wants." Hannah heard it one night in the break room, the words floating sharp as glass. She didn't react, just folded her notes and left quietly, but the sting lingered. That night, she didn't answer Ethan's call. He sensed the distance immediately. The next day, he showed up at her apartment not angry, just worried. She opened the door, hair unkempt, exhaustion in her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. He looked at her for a moment. "I don't care what people say, Hannah, you know that, right?" "It's not about you," she said. "It's about what happens to me because of you. I worked hard to be taken seriously here. I can't afford to be someone's story." He stepped closer, his voice lower now. "You're not a story. You're the only real thing I have had in years." She didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part feared how easily his world could swallow her as whole. But the truth, the raw, unspoken truth, was that she already cared, and that terrified her. For a while, they tried to keep their connection quiet. Late-night calls, brief dinners, long conversations that spilled into laughter and silence. But secrets don't stay buried long, not when pride and privilege are involved. Word reached the hospital board, and soon an administrator called her in to discuss professional boundaries. The tone was polite, the meaning wasn't. She was being warned. That night, she sat on her balcony, city lights glittering below, phone silent beside her. She thought about everything she'd worked for: stability, respect, anonymity. She thought about Ethan, his sincerity, his persistence, his mother's warmth, and she thought about herself, a nurse with tired hands, who somehow ended up entangled with someone who lived in another universe entirely. When he called again, she finally answered. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "This can't go on, Ethan." He didn't argue at first. He just listened, breathing slow. "Tell me it's because you don't care," he said finally. "If you say that, I'll stop." She closed her eyes, the light caught in her throat. "I care," she whispered. "That's why I have to stop." There was a long pause, then a soft exhale that sounded like defeat. "Then I'll wait," he said. However long it takes. Weeks passed with silence between them, but life had a strange sense of timing. One cold morning, a delivery arrived at their hospital for her. Not flowers, not jewelry, just a single, old leather-bound book titled The Anatomy of Courage. Inside the cover, a note read, "For the woman who reminds me what real courage looks like. A.E." She traced the handwriting with her thumb, her chest tightening with something that was both ache and warmth. Maybe she had been right to step back, maybe she was wrong. All she knew was that he hadn't disappeared, and that meant something. Somewhere high above the city, in an office that looked out over the skyline, Ethan sat staring at the same snow falling that had once brought her into his life. He didn't know what would happen next. All he knew was that he'd stopped seeing the world in profit and loss. Now, he saw it in moments, in her steady hands, her quiet defiance, her unspoken strength. And though neither of them said it aloud, both carried the same truth inside them. Some connections don't end. They wait, patient as winter, certain as spring.